Dr. Oliver Bennett stood tall at the crash site, his broad shoulders squared against the morning sun as he surveyed the scene before him. At 32, he was the youngest head xenobiologist the International Space Research Center had ever appointed, known as much for his brilliant mind as for his unorthodox approaches to research. His dark hair was slightly tousled from the desert wind, and his warm brown eyes studied the sleek spacecraft that lay half buried in the New Mexico sand. "Life signs are stable but completely unlike anything we've seen before," his assistant Thomas reported, checking the readings on his tablet. "Whatever's in there is definitely alive, but the biological signature is extraordinary." Oliver adjusted his protective suit, his strong hands moving efficiently over the seals. The crash site had been cordoned off for miles, but he could still hear the whir of military helicopters circling overhead. They had precious little time before higher authorities would step in and take control of the situation. A soft humming emanated from the vessel, and as he approached the ship's seamless hull, he noticed what appeared to be a doorway forming in its surface. "Stand back," he commanded, his deep voice carrying across the desert air to his team. "Something's happening." The ship's hull parted silently, releasing a shimmer of opalescent mist. As it cleared, Oliver found himself looking up, way up, at a sight that defied everything he thought he knew about xenobiology. She was easily 10 feet tall, yet moved with impossible grace as she emerged from the ship. Her form was humanoid but carried an otherworldly beauty that took his breath away. Pearlescent skin seemed to capture and release light with each movement, and her silvery white hair floated around her face as if suspended in an invisible current. But what caught Oliver's attention most were her eyes, large, violet pools that held unmistakable intelligence and, surprisingly, fear. The alien took an unsteady step forward, then stumbled to her knees, bringing her closer to his height. Behind him, Oliver could hear weapons being drawn, but he held up his hand. "Stand down," he ordered firmly. "She's injured." To his amazement, she spoke, her voice carrying a musical quality that seemed to resonate in his chest. "Please, help," she said in perfect English, though her voice held an ethereal echo. Oliver didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, ignoring the protests of his security team. "I'm Dr. Oliver Bennett," he said clearly, resting a hand on his chest. "You're safe here. We'll help you." The alien's violet eyes widened as she studied him, seeming to take in every detail of his human form. "I am Thura," she replied, her voice growing stronger. "My people, they call me Aberration. Too large, too different." She winced, one hand going to her side where Oliver noticed a faint glow pulsing beneath her skin. "I'm a doctor, a healer," he explained, moving closer with careful, measured steps. Unlike his colleagues who hung back in fear, Oliver felt drawn to her. "Will you let me help you?" Thura's head tilted, studying him with those fascinating violet eyes. "You are not afraid of my form?" Oliver smiled, his expression warm and genuine. "Different doesn't mean frightening. It just means unique." For the first time, Thura's expression shifted into what Oliver interpreted as a smile, her pearlescent skin seeming to glow from within. "You're kind, humans. I chose Earth because I sensed kindness. Different perspectives. Was I right?" "Not everyone is kind," Oliver admitted, hearing the military helicopters growing closer. "But I promise you, I'll do everything in my power to protect you and help you heal." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Despite initial resistance from military personnel, Oliver insisted on having Thura transferred to the research center's medical bay rather than a military facility. He argued that her unique biology required specialized scientific expertise that only his team could provide. As they settled Thura into a specially constructed medical chamber designed to accommodate her height, Oliver couldn't help but notice how she seemed to shrink into herself whenever others entered the room. For a being of such impressive size and otherworldly beauty, her behavior spoke of deep-seated trauma. "Your world," Thura said later that evening, when it was just the two of them in the lab, it has such variety. Such differences in your people. Yet you live together. Not always perfectly, Oliver replied, adjusting the atmospheric controls to help stabilize her condition. We still struggle with accepting differences. But we're learning, evolving as a society. As he worked, he found himself increasingly fascinated not just by her alien biology, but by her gentle nature and the depth of emotion she conveyed. Despite their obvious physical differences, there was something about her that called to him on a level he couldn't quite explain. Rest now, he finally said, noting how her energy seemed to be flagging. Tomorrow we'll begin proper treatment for your injuries, and then, well, we'll figure out the rest together. As he left the lab that night, Oliver couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter would change not just his understanding of alien life, but his own life as well. What he didn't know was just how right he would prove to be. The following weeks at the International Space Research Center proved challenging for both Thera and Oliver. While the initial excitement of first contact had subsided, the real work of understanding and protecting their unusual visitor had only begun. Colonel Richard Walsh strode into the lab one morning, his face set in its usual stern expression. Dr. Bennett, the Pentagon is demanding daily reports on the aliens' capabilities. They're particularly interested in her biological composition. Could her unique traits be weaponized? Oliver felt his jaw clench, his shoulders tensing as he stepped protectively between Walsh and Thera's medical chamber. Her name is Thera, Colonel, and she's a refugee, not a weapon. The only tests we're conducting are medical in nature, to help her heal. You're being naive, son, Walsh countered, his voice dropping. We have a 10-foot-tall alien with unprecedented biological abilities in our facility. Every major military power on Earth would kill for that kind of advantage. From her medical chamber, Thera watched the exchange silently, her violet eyes moving between the two men. Oliver noticed how she seemed to make herself smaller despite her tremendous height, and something in his chest tightened at the sight. Then it's a good thing she came to us first, Oliver replied firmly, drawing himself up to his full height. Though he stood nearly a foot shorter than Walsh, his presence filled the room. This is a scientific facility, not a military one. If you want to study weapons, do it elsewhere. After Walsh left, Oliver noticed Thera's pearlescent skin had dulled slightly, a stress response they documented over the past weeks. I'm sorry about that, he said, approaching her chamber. Some humans fear what they don't understand. Fear I understand, Thera replied softly, her musical voice carrying that ethereal echo that never failed to captivate him. On my world, I learned early that fear often drives cruelty. She raised her hand, creating a holographic image between them, a younger Thera, already towering over her people, their forms perfectly proportioned while she stood out like a gleaming beacon. They called me aberrant, she continued. Said my size would destabilize our society's perfect harmony. Each passing cycle, as I grew taller, the isolation grew worse. The hologram showed Thera alone in what appeared to be a beautiful but sterile chamber, other members of her species passing by without acknowledgement. Oliver reached out instinctively, his hand passing through the hologram. You're not alone anymore. Later that day, Dr. Rachel Sullivan, one of the younger researchers, approached Oliver in the break room. The way you stand up to Walsh is impressive, she said, pouring herself coffee. And honestly, Thera is fascinating. The way she moves, those abilities she has, it's like something out of a dream. Oliver smiled, grateful for the support. Beauty comes in all forms, doesn't it? Even 10-foot-tall ones. Speaking of which, Rachel lowered her voice, some of us have noticed how much time you spend with her, even after hours. And how her skin seems to glow brighter whenever you enter the room. Oliver felt heat rise to his cheeks, though he maintained his professional demeanor. She's fascinating from a scientific perspective. The way her biology responds to emotions, her ability to project thoughts and memories. Rachel smiled knowingly. Just scientific fascination. Got it. That evening, Oliver brought something special to the lab, his tablet loaded with Earth's classical music. "I thought you might enjoy experiencing some of our art," he explained to Thera. "Music especially. Your voice already carries such beautiful harmonics." As the first notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata filled the room, Thera's entire form seemed to resonate with the music, her pearlescent skin shifting with subtle patterns of light. "This is beautiful," she said softly. "We have nothing like this on my world. Art is considered inefficient, emotional expression a weakness." "That sounds like a lonely way to live," Oliver said, watching the play of light across her features. It was. Until now. Thera's violet eyes fixed on him. "You've shown me more kindness in these few weeks than I've known in all my cycles. You look at me and see beauty where others see a monster. Because that's what you are, beautiful." The words left Oliver's lips before he could stop them, and he felt his heart rate increase. "I mean, scientifically speaking, your biological structure is remarkable." Thera's skin brightened, and what could only be described as a laugh echoed through the room. "You humans try so hard to hide your feelings behind words. Your heart rate increases, your skin flushes, all these beautiful, obvious signs." Oliver found himself laughing too, running a hand through his dark hair. "I suppose we're not as subtle as we think." Their moment was interrupted by an urgent knock. Thomas burst into the lab, looking worried. "Dr. Bennett, you need to see this. Our deep space monitoring station picked up something entering the solar system. The energy signature matches Thera's ship." The light beneath Thera's skin nearly went out. "No," she whispered. "They've found me." Oliver immediately moved closer to her chamber. "Who's found you?" "Thera, what aren't you telling me?" "The Primarch," Thera's voice trembled. "Our world's leaders. I didn't just leave because I was different. I left because..." Her skin pulsed with fear. "Because they wanted to use me. My size, my unique biology, they saw it as a means to enhance their species, to create a new breed of perfect beings." Oliver pressed his hand against the chamber wall. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was afraid," Thera admitted, her own hand meeting his against the barrier. "Afraid that if you knew the truth, you'd see me as they did, an experiment, a specimen, a thing to be used." "Never," Oliver said firmly. "We'll figure this out together. I promise." As alarms began blaring throughout the facility, Oliver knew keeping that promise would prove challenging. But looking at Thera, seeing the trust in those violet eyes, he knew he would do whatever it took to protect her. Science, politics, and military concerns aside, something deeper had grown between them, something that transcended the barriers of species, size, and even form itself. What neither of them realized was that their greatest test was yet to come, and the choices they would soon face would challenge not just their growing feelings, but the fate of two worlds. 3 days after the detection of the approaching ships, Oliver made a decision that would either save or doom them all. With Colonel Walsh breathing down his neck and government officials swarming the facility, he chose to move Thera to the facility's underground backup lab in the dead of night. "This is extremely risky," Thomas whispered as they reprogrammed the environmental controls in the new location. "If Walsh finds out..." "He won't," Oliver interrupted, his fingers flying over the keyboard with practiced precision. "Not if we're careful. And I won't let them turn her over to the military or her people without a fight." Thera's pearlescent skin pulsed with concern as they settled her into the new chamber. "You risk much for me, Oliver. Your career, your freedom. Some things are worth the risk." He finished calibrating the atmospheric settings, his broad shoulders tense with concentration. The backup lab was smaller but better shielded from detection. More importantly, it wasn't on any of the official facility maps provided to the military. Later that night, after Thomas had left, Oliver sat near Thera's chamber, sharing stories about Earth. He'd discovered that she had an insatiable curiosity about human culture, especially their art and music. Despite their size difference, there was an easy comfort between them now. So in this Beauty and the Beast story, Thera mused, her musical voice thoughtful, the humans feared the beast because of his appearance, yet Beauty saw past it to who he truly was? Exactly, Oliver smiled, looking up at her. It's one of our oldest themes in storytelling, looking past the surface to find the beauty within. On my world, there are no such stories. Deviation from the norm is seen as corruption, a flaw to be eliminated. Her skin dimmed slightly. When I began to grow larger than the others, they tried to alter my genetic structure through forced evolution. The pain in her voice made Oliver's hands clench. They hurt you? They tried to remake me, to force my form into their accepted parameters. Thera's skin rippled with the memory. But my biology refused to change. Each attempt only made me stronger, more distinct. Eventually, they decided if they couldn't correct me, they would use me. Oliver stood, placing his hand against the chamber wall. Used how? My size and unique biological makeup could be exploited, Thera explained, her light dimming further. The Primarch discovered that I could adapt to and enhance any genetic material I came in contact with. They wanted to use me as a living laboratory to create a new, perfect, species. That's why you ran. Yes. But not only because I feared being used as an experiment. Her violet eyes met his. I ran because I had begun to dream. To imagine a place where being different wasn't a flaw, where beauty could exist in many forms. I never imagined I would find not just such a place, but someone who would see me as. Her voice faltered. As what? Oliver whispered. As someone worthy of love. The word hung in the air between them. Oliver felt his heart race, and he saw Thera's skin brighten in response to his reaction. Thera, I. An alarm blared suddenly, cutting through the moment. Oliver rushed to the computer terminal. No, no, no. What is it? They're scanning the facility with some new technology. Looking for your unique biological signature. His fingers flew over the keyboard. The shielding in this lab won't hide you for long. Thera's form straightened with determination. Then perhaps it's time to stop hiding. Oliver, there's something I haven't told you about my abilities. Before she could continue, the lab door burst open. Colonel Walsh stood there with a team of armed soldiers. Dr. Bennett, you're relieved of duty. The alien will be transferred to a secure military facility immediately. No. Oliver moved to stand between the soldiers and Thera's chamber, his stance protective and unyielding. She's not a specimen for you to study or exploit. This isn't a request, Doctor. Walsh nodded to his men. And we're not the only ones who want her. The Primarch's ships will reach Earth orbit in less than 48 hours. They're demanding we hand her over, or they'll consider it an act of war. You don't understand what they'll do to her. I understand that one alien isn't worth risking global conflict. Walsh stepped forward. Now step aside, son. Suddenly, Thera's chamber began to pulse with brilliant light. Her pearlescent skin glowed with an intensity that filled the room. I will not be used as an experiment, not by my people, and not by yours. The light emanating from her form grew until it filled the room. Oliver shielded his eyes, feeling a strange warmth wash over him. When the light faded, he gasped. The chamber was empty. Thera stood in the room at her full height, her 10-foot form radiating power. But instead of fear or anger, her entire being pulsed with something else, love, determination, and hope. My ability to adapt isn't just about genetics, she explained, her voice resonating with new strength. I can also create protective fields, barriers that can shield others. A protection, not a weapon. She reached out one elegant hand to Oliver. I choose how my difference is used. And I choose to protect what I love. Oliver took her hand without hesitation, marveling at how perfectly his hand fit in hers despite their size difference. Together, they faced Walsh and his soldiers, who had lowered their weapons in awe. "Colonel," Oliver said firmly, standing tall beside Thera, "I think it's time we had a real discussion about first contact diplomacy. Because in less than 48 hours, Earth needs to make a choice: stand with those who would suppress anything different, or protect those who come seeking sanctuary." As Thera's protective field surrounded them both, Oliver knew they had passed a point of no return. The next 2 days would determine not just their fate, but potentially the relationship between Earth and the stars themselves. Yet standing there, his hand joined with Thera's, he felt no fear, only the certainty that love, in any form, was worth fighting for. The next 48 hours transformed the International Space Research Center into a hive of diplomatic activity. With 3 sleek vessels from Thera's homeworld now visible even to Earth's civilian telescopes, the world's governments scrambled to form a unified response. At the center of it all stood Oliver and Thera, their joined hands a symbol of possibility that transcended worlds. "The alien vessels will enter Earth's atmosphere in 6 hours, Thomas reported, studying the latest readings. "They're not responding to any of our attempts at communication." Oliver felt Thera's hand tighten around his. Over the past day, they discovered that their physical contact seemed to strengthen her protective field, creating a synergy between human and alien biology that defied scientific explanation. "They won't negotiate," Thera's musical voice carried an edge of steel. "The Primarch believes in absolute control. Any world they encounter must either submit to their perfect order or be cleansed." Colonel Walsh, who had surprisingly become their ally after witnessing Thera's true nature, frowned. "You're saying Earth is at risk regardless of whether we hand you over?" "Yes. My escape was merely an excuse. The Primarch has been watching Earth for some time, seeing your diversity as a corruption that must be purified." Thera's skin rippled with emotion. "That's why I chose Earth. I knew if anyone could resist their ideology of conformity, it would be humans." The military command center they'd established buzzed with activity as analysts tracked the approaching ships. Oliver led Thera to a quiet corner, needing to understand more. "There's something else, isn't there? Something you haven't told me about why they want you so badly?" Thera's pearlescent skin shimmered with conflicting emotions. "Yes. I am not simply an aberration. I was meant to be their future queen." "Queen?" Oliver's dark eyes widened. "The Primarch selects specific genetic lines to create their rulers, attempting to breed perfect beings to lead their perfect society. But in me, their breeding program produced something unexpected. When I began to grow larger, develop unique abilities, they saw it as both a failure and an opportunity." Through their joined hands, Oliver could feel waves of old pain and fear radiating from her. They wanted to use their own queen as a breeding experiment. More than that. They wanted to use me as proof that even their greatest mistake could be turned to their advantage. My public submission and transformation into their genetic template would show that all deviation could be corrected, one way or another. A commotion from the command center interrupted them. "Multiple energy signatures," Thomas called out. "They're powering up something big." The main screen showed the 3 vessels arranging themselves in a triangle formation above Earth's atmosphere. Energy began to pulse between them, forming a web of shimmering light. "No," Thera's voice trembled. "They're preparing a mass genetic resequencer. They'll use it to forcibly alter the DNA of everything it touches, turning organic matter into forms that they can control." "How long?" Walsh demanded. 3 hours at most. Once the field is established, they'll be able to affect an entire hemisphere at once." Oliver's mind raced. "Can it be stopped?" "Only by creating a counterfield of equal power." Thera's skin brightened with determination. "Which is exactly what they bred me to do, though not in the way they intended." What are you saying? My unique biology, it can absorb and redirect genetic energy on a massive scale. That's why they wanted me as their template. But instead of using it to conform, I can use it to protect. Thera turned to face Oliver fully. But to generate enough power, I'll need help. Your help. Understanding dawned on Oliver. The connection we share when we touch. It amplifies your abilities. Yes. But attempting this could be dangerous for you. The energy transfer required. Her violet eyes filled with concern. I don't care about the danger. Oliver squeezed her hand. I trust you. The next 2 hours were a blur of preparation. While the world's military forces immobilized, scientists worked to understand and enhance the unique energy signature created by Oliver and Thera's connection. They discovered that their bond had created something entirely new, a hybrid biological field that was neither purely human nor purely alien. The ships have completed their formation, Thomas reported. Energy levels are reaching critical. Oliver and Thera stood on the facility's roof, their joined hands glowing with shared power. Around them, measuring equipment hummed as scientists monitored their output. Remember, Thera said softly, her musical voice carrying to him alone, no matter what happens, knowing you has made every moment worth it. You taught me that being different isn't a flaw, it's a gift. And you taught me that love knows no boundaries. Oliver reached up with his free hand to touch her face, marveling at how she instinctively leaned down to meet his touch. Not of form, not of species, not even of worlds. Above them, the sky began to shimmer as the Primarcha's genetic resequencer activated. The air itself seemed to vibrate with potential change, threatening to remake everything it touched. Now! Walsh ordered. Thera's form blazed with light as she drew upon every bit of power she possessed. Through their joined hands, Oliver felt energy surge between them, not just power, but love, trust, and the strength that comes from finally finding acceptance. Their unique resonance shot skyward, a beam of pure light that contained all the potential of both their worlds. The impact when their energy met the Primarcha's field was spectacular. The shimmering patterns in the sky shattered, raining down harmless light instead of transformation. The three ships wobbled in their formation, their own energy web disrupted by the pure power of Thera and Oliver's combined force. But the strain was immense. Oliver felt as if every cell in his body was on fire. Through their connection, he could feel Thera struggling as well, her entire form vibrating with the effort of channeling so much power. Don't let go, her voice flickered weakly. Almost, done. With one final surge of energy, their combined beam punched through the Primarcha's field. The genetic web between the ships exploded in a cascade of light, and all three vessels went dark, their power neutralized by the backlash. As emergency teams rushed to the roof, Oliver felt his knees buckle. The last thing he saw was Thera's concerned face above him, her violet eyes filled with love, fear, and something else, triumph. They had won this battle, but as consciousness faded, he knew their greatest challenge still lay ahead, convincing two worlds that love could bridge any difference, heal any divide, and light the way to a future neither of them had dared to dream possible. Oliver awoke in the medical bay 3 days later, his hands still tingling with the memory of Thera's touch. The first thing he saw was her towering form beside his bed, her pearlescent skin casting soft, comforting patterns of light across the walls. "Welcome back," she whispered, her musical voice filled with relief as she carefully took his hand in her much larger one. "You had me worried." "What happened?" His voice was hoarse. "The Primarch." "Defeated," Colonel Walsh answered, entering the room. "Their ships were completely depowered by your, whatever that was. We have their leaders in custody, and what we've learned from them is quite interesting." He gave Thera a respectful nod. "Your Highness." Oliver tried to sit up. "Their leaders?" "The energy backlash didn't just disable their ships," Thera explained, helping him adjust with gentle hands that belied her massive size. It also disrupted the genetic modifications they used to maintain their power. They're being held in specialized containment while both our worlds decide their fate. Both our worlds? Walsh smiled, a rare sight. A lot has happened while you were recovering, Doctor. It seems when word got back to Thuraz's homeworld about how their future queen chose exile rather than become a tool for oppression, and then used her defective abilities to save another species, well, let's just say there's been a revolution in thinking among her people. Thuraz's skin pulsed with emotion. The breeding program that created me was exposed. Many of my kind who were deemed imperfect have stepped forward, demanding recognition and rights. The Primarch's grip on power was built on the myth of genetic perfection. Once that myth was shattered, everything changed, Oliver finished, squeezing her hand. The familiar warmth of their connection flowed between them. Not everything, Thuraz said softly, her violet eyes meeting his. Some things were true from the very beginning. Over the next few weeks, as Oliver regained his strength, he watched in amazement as humanity rose to the challenge of first contact. The defeat of the Primarch had united Earth's nations in a way few things could. The sight of a human man and a 10-foot-tall alien woman standing together, combining their strengths to protect both their worlds, had captured imaginations globally. The diplomatic team wants to know if you'll serve as Earth's primary ambassador to Thuraz's world, Thomas told Oliver one afternoon as they walked through the facility's garden. They had created special paths to accommodate Thuraz's height, and she was currently fascinated by a patch of sunflowers, her graceful form bending to study them more closely. Me? Oliver laughed. I'm a xenobiologist, not a diplomat. You're the man who saw beauty where others saw a threat, Thomas pointed out. Who proved that love can bridge any distance, any difference. That's exactly the kind of diplomat we need. A month after the Primarch's defeat, Oliver stood with Thuraz in the same garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that made her pearlescent skin shimmer with reflected light. The interim council on my world has asked me to return, Thuraz said quietly, her musical voice carrying a hint of uncertainty. Not as a specimen or a symbol of conformity, but as a leader who can help guide our society toward a more accepting future. Oliver felt his heart skip. When do you leave? That depends on you. Thuraz knelt down to be closer to his level, her violet eyes full of love. They've agreed to accept Earth's choice of ambassador, and my choice of mate. Mate? Oliver's breath caught. My people are learning that love comes in many forms, that true beauty lies in the differences that make each being unique. Her large, elegant hand gently cupped his cheek. I no longer have to choose between my world and my heart. But I would never assume. Oliver pressed his hand against hers. Yes. Yes? Yes to being Earth's ambassador. Yes to helping your people embrace change. Yes to proving that love knows no bounds. He smiled up at her. Yes to all of it, as long as we're together. Thuraz's entire form blazed with joy, her pearlescent skin glowing like a sunrise. She lifted him effortlessly, bringing him up to her eye level with a grace that still amazed him, and their foreheads touched in a gesture that had become uniquely theirs. 1 year later, the garden had grown to include plants from both worlds, a living symbol of the harmony possible between their peoples. The paths had been widened further to accommodate the increasing number of visitors from Thuraz's world, many of whom now proudly displayed their own unique traits that would have once been considered flaws. Oliver stood with Thuraz, her hand enveloping his as always, watching a group of human children playing with young visitors from her world, their laughter mixing in the afternoon sun. Their own living quarters had been specially designed to accommodate both their needs, sections scaled for Thuraz's height alongside human-sized spaces, creating a home that celebrated their differences rather than trying to hide them. Do you ever regret it? Oliver asked, looking up at his mate. Choosing a life that means constantly bridging two worlds? Thuraz's free hand gently ruffled his dark hair, a gesture she knew always made him smile. how could I regret choosing love? You taught me that being different isn't a burden to bear, but a gift to share. Every day we prove that true beauty lies not in conformity, but in the courage to be uniquely ourselves. As the sun set on another day of their shared life, Oliver leaned against Thera's tall form, feeling the warm pulse of their connection. They had rewritten the rules of what was possible, between species, between worlds, between hearts. Their love had not only saved two worlds from conflict but had opened up possibilities neither world had imagined. Above them, the stars began to appear, no longer distant points of light, but bridges between worlds, promises of new connections waiting to be made. And in the garden of their shared home, where earth flowers bloomed alongside alien flora, their love continued to show that true beauty knows no bounds, that the heart recognizes no limitations, and that in the end, it's our differences that make the universe not just beautiful, but extraordinary. The end.